Good morning. It's nice to be here with you. Um, this is a place near and dear to my family and to me. I went to the BYU Law School in the charter class. I, Before that, my wife went to 4 years of college here. She was in a dorm just south of campus, and I used to ride my motorcycle down on days like this and in the snow occasionally to see my girlfriend. Um, I used to also get up in the morning and wipe the, what we called at the steel plant, the kish off your car. How many of you remember that sort of shiny carbon stuff we used to get on the cars from the steel plant? But I remember when I used to drive from my home in Salt Lake City down to Geneva, and I could do it in 20 minutes. I would live up by the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon now, and how much this valley has changed and how much it's going to continue to change. I was thinking last night about the history of this valley, and it really got its jump start in growth because of sort of an unusual event in Utah, and that was the Utah War of 1857-58. And at that point, the Latter-day Saints evacuated Salt Lake City and all moved to Utah County. Everybody moved out. They left their homes standing, but with straw in them ready to burn, depending on what Johnston's army did when it got here. And so Henry Grow, who was a bridge builder in the early days, showed up down here and built the first big bridge across the Provo River in 1858. My wife's great-grandfather, Archibald Gardner, showed up, and there was no lumber mill, and he built a lumber mill in Spanish Fork. So they weren't all just living in clay hovels built into hillsides in Spanish Fork. And so this area's growth took off at that point, and I just don't think anybody could have predicted what we're seeing today. If you look back 10 or 15 years ago, just the patterns of growth in Utah, how strongly that pattern is moving south. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of your perspective that I can gather from documents. Now, you got to realize I looked at documents and I sort of know your area, so if I say something that's not correct, I hope you'll just ignore it and take what I do say that's useful and maybe think about how to apply it. But I want to talk about the relationship between your 2030 vision, your general plan, and your zoning ordinances a little bit, which is what I was asked to talk about. And first, this is a shout out to the administration, the mayors, the council, the neighborhood organizations of Provo, the many committees. You've done the visioning really well. So as I go through the vision and I look at the individual things you care about and then strategies, it's a very sophisticated document. And if you go around the country and look at general plans and zoning ordinances, it's pretty unusual to find that they actually start with what matters to people. They tend to start somewhere with a document that their planner stole from a nearby city or town and modified. And so you've really done it right because you said what really matters to us. And I've listed the core values from your vision on the left-hand side here: family, safe city, community, faith, education, business and economic vitality, responsible government, and healthy, inviting environment. And the purpose of general plans is to take what people want and turn it into a long-range concept. It's really a strategic plan, a set of goals and long-term strategies that are enduring. Now, there are always a lot of tactics going on, and there's a lot of flurry going on in current zoning debates, but a general plan is intended to have stability and to be forward-looking. And it's intended to be a vision of the future, the embodiment of that, the first legal document that gives you something to rely on. It's sort of like your constitution of what Provo will be like. And so it's intended to be updated, strengthened, adapt over time. Hi, Mary, one of my former board members. I just haven't seen you for a while. Didn't see you come in. Your zoning ordinance is about tactics. It's sort of shorter term. It's supposed to move more quickly. It's supposed to be in more detail. But that general plan, which is the middle document there, is intended to be your legal expression, first legal expression of those things. And I'm going to come back to that because no vision works unless it relies on the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the people who live there. You can plan something, but unless it has that foundation, it won't happen anyway. You may get divergences here and there, but that's got to be the basis, and you've done that right. The second thing you've done right is you have lots of citizen involvement. I went through a lot of the committees looking at who was on them. I recognize a few of the names, but a powerful structure of citizen involvement, a neighborhood structure that is very sophisticated. As I've looked at other cities, it's rare you see that kind of a structure. So if that structure is working, if it's giving voice, if it's helping to guide the general plan and the zoning ordinances, and to make that vision actually happen based upon those values, then that's a great structure. So you've got a great stakeholder pattern created. You've looked at the vision, the values of people. I want to talk more about the values in a minute. One thing that you could do probably a little more of is to look at scenarios, different alternative ways you could turn out. And you have done some of that, I know, and it's sort of the natural way we all think anyway. If you're working on the issue of air quality for Provo, you're going to think about, well, if we do this, we'll end up here, and if we do that, we'll end up here. And so we naturally think about scenarios, but doing that in a sophisticated, ongoing pattern of thinking, creating a way of making that your process in Provo. You see responsible government down there, which is a process element. It's how you get it done. Very concerned about how we do things, okay? We are very process-oriented in Utah, more so than most places. We've thought a lot about what we think about property rights and freedom and the role of government, and as a result, we care deeply about process. But part of that process is helping government think in the alternatives, different ways we could turn out. And so scenarios planning becomes a key element of that. Now, I want to talk about just, does this general plan deliver what your vision seeks? And it's really a question. I'm not going to answer the question today, but I'm going to raise some questions. Do current ordinances align with the vision and the plan which you have? Now, why should you care, or why do you care? These are those columns. The yellow ones are a projection of where growth will go in Utah over the years ahead by 2050. Yellow is projections by one of the major real estate advisory firms in America based upon the land availability left in the various valleys along the Wasatch Front. The one in black is the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget analysis of where the new population of Utah will go. So this is additional people being added to different counties by 2050. Salt Lake County said you're going to grow by how much? Utah County would grow by, General Governor's Office, 673,000 people by 2050. So that's 35 years. I want you to just wrap your head around 673,000 new people, in addition to the ones who are already here, all by 2050 over the next 35 years. Now I want you to wrap your head around what may be a more accurate number, which is the 840. We're approaching, you're getting into the real numbers. You could almost be 1 million. If things were to, Utah Valley is sort of a safe haven. Imagine the world getting worse. You could end up with another 150,000 just wanting to show up here with you over the next 35 years. And so it's not unlikely you could have 1 million people, new people here, over the next 35 years. And so, will Provo be like it is today? The answer is no. It's going to be different, and that is what you're thinking about with your general plan, your vision, your general plan. And currently your vision looks out to 2030. I might suggest you think a little more about extending another horizon beyond that. So 2030 is short enough that you can actually sort of get strategic and tactical, but sometimes it's good to have another cut like at 2050, because sometimes when you look out to 2050, you can see things you can't see with a 2030 horizon. And so when we did the first visioning effort for the Wasatch Front and back almost 20 years ago now with Envision Utah, we did two time cuts, sort of one generation and 2 generations. And we learned some things about water even back then and about air quality, which we wouldn't have seen if we hadn't done a longer time frame. But can you imagine how many people live in Utah County today? Anybody know? Current population? 500,000. Okay, about 500,000. So 845,000 more over 35 years. Now, why do I think that's going to happen? Well, I have 6 children. 5 of the 6 have moved back to Utah in the last couple of years. They were all gone for a while, and I've still got 1 gone. But 2 of them are in this valley. Okay, one's in a high-tech, they're both in high-tech jobs, helping run companies, but one of them lives in Lehigh, and one of them lives just behind Cabela's. Okay, and that wave, I can see it in my own family as they're sort of, my own family's moving back to this area. So think about, as we talk today, 845,000, 1.5 or 1 3/4 people for every one of you that's here today. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the statewide visioning effort we've been involved with the governor for the last couple of years. There are lots of ways to think about the future. One is to get a bunch of planners in the back room. That's not our way. We think visioning has to be informed by what people want most, particularly the people whose hopes and dreams really matter, and that's those who live here today and those who will think about those who will live here tomorrow. So the way our visioning effort worked was we undertook to study 11 topics that Utahns selected in some polling we did, then study the values of Utahns. We asked the governor to join with us and asked 400 community leaders and experts who knew about these 11 topics to come together, work for 18 months, and there were 8 action teams, as we called them, that looked at the 11 topics. And so those 8 action teams of experts came up with scenarios for each of those topics, choices about the future. If you decide to do this today, where would we end up? With the best expert advice and modeling we could, what would Utah look like in 2050 on those 11 topics? We asked Utahns to weigh in. How many of you took the survey? 53,000 Utahns took the survey. Thank you so much. Nowhere in America have we ever seen a response like that. Utahns care deeply about the future. They care deeply about their families. They care deeply about the legacy they leave behind. 53,000 more than doubled the largest response. The largest response up till now had been the county of San Diego, which has 3 million people, same size as Utah. They got about 28,000 to respond. They had 4 times as many people working on it, and they had spent twice as much money and got half the results. So we're pretty proud of this. Orlando, which is a lot bigger than Utah, got 7,000 respondents to a similar survey not too long ago. Okay, from then, the efforts of the task forces or the action teams with their scenarios, what Utahns chose, we've created a vision looking at those 11 topics and then combining them into a single vision of Utah's future. I use the word vision because what we do is not planning. We're not doing detailed, localized plans for anyone, but we're just thinking about what are our collective aspirations about what we really want for coming generations in Utah. And so a vision for us is made up of goals, which are the outcomes Utahns wanted, and the strategies. And in this case, the strategies came both from Utahns telling us what they were willing to do and the task forces telling us what would have to be done to get to certain outcomes. So what's the key thing you learn about Utahns if you study them? So we've done 3 detailed value studies of Utahns over the years, and Utahns are really values-driven. They have a set of values which are widely shared in Utah, regardless of age, religious background, whether their ancestors have been here for generations or they arrived in the last 5 years. Utahns share this set of values. I just want to go through them for a minute. The most important value to Utahns has to do with and I'm talking about values that relate to urban form, to the cities, the towns, and places we live, the experiences we have from day to day in those places. So the number one thing people want in Utah starts with an attribute, which is people and families that are friendly. We have shared values, close-knit communities. And I want you to think about the list you made of your values in Provo. And think about family was number 1. I want you to look at these key values of Utahns. Number 1 is a safe, secure environment, family-friendly, shared values, close-knit communities. Second level up is what do you get from that? It's a good place to raise children, spend time with your family and friends. Next one up is I feel safe. I have a better sense of community, and that gives me peace of mind or peace of conscience and personal security. Okay, so you can see the values laid into that. The next one has to do with whether or not you can provide for your family, earn a living, enjoy your life, and so on. It's about economics. But if you see the third level up, it's about being able to do more, have a better life, but to provide for your family. The next one is about the scenic beauty and outdoor recreation of Utah. We really all love Utah. Look at the second one up. Why do we love Utah? Well, we enjoy the great outdoors, but we use it as a place for bonding, to enjoy our family and friends, and so on, live a healthier life ourselves and with our families, which leads to happiness and personal enjoyment. Now, there are a couple of really negative things right now going on in Utah when you do a value study. One is about air quality, because two things happen that impact your family. One is they may be sick. There are people, particularly sensitive populations, as the EPA would call them, who are affected by the quality of the air here in Utah. And as I get older, I'm becoming part of one of those sensitive populations. Someday I will struggle to breathe. I hope it's 30 years from now when that happens, but the air matters. It's going to matter to me more than it does today. But another problem with air quality is it stops our economic development. It may mean our families move away. Two of my daughters-in-law have asked me, should they move out of the valleys along the Wasatch Front? Should they move up into Park City or up into Wasatch County to have cleaner air? And so you can see the family component of that. This is one that's more strong in rural Utah. It's the second negative value and has to do with their feelings about government and the restrictions on their lives, the inability to use the public lands for economic growth and so on. So there's economic weakness, but what happens if the economy is weak in rural Utah? What happens to families? My children move away. So when you, by the way, we had Utahns rank the importance of the various issues. I just want to show you jobs and economy, being able for the children to stay, get a job if they want to, being able to provide for your family, water for the future, air quality, education. You can see the top ones, but all of these topics really matter to Utahns about the future. Now, we would define the values that, and if you look at your list and our list, they are almost identical. I can see the components overlapping in so many ways. First would be, what do Utahns want? They want safe, secure, resilient places for themselves and their family. They want it to be prosperous. They want it to be neighborly, fair, and caring. And they want healthy, beautiful, and clean environment and a lifestyle. Now, I want you to just think about what I just went through, and then I want you to look at yours and see how much they overlap. So, family, did you see family in all the detailed? We've spent a lot of money researching Utahns. You just did it, I think, more intuitively from how you feel. And if we did all the research right, yours should match pretty much what we found out, right? Family, safe and secure, the quality of communities in which we live, which is a major component, and the sense of community, a major component of safety and security. Faith, which is the people. And when we did the original value study, the research was done by an out-of-state firm that came back and said, Utahns want to live with people who are honest, ethical, and moral. It doesn't matter what religion they are. It doesn't matter where they came from, but they want neighbors who are honest, ethical, and moral. That was the definition. And they defined Utah. This is a non-Mormon, out-of-state research firm. They defined it as people's feeling about this place was a feeling of safe haven. Haven, by the way, is a word. What's the other word for haven? So if you go to Germany and you land at the airport, it's called a Flughafen, a fly harbor. A haven is a harbor. So a safe harbor, a place where the boat is out of the storm. And so that's a way Utahns feel about this place. Education, sort of the key for quality families and economics and so on. Business and economic vitality matching prosperous. Responsible government, which, as I said, was a process which really matters. And then healthy, inviting environment, which is our clean, safe, beautiful, and so on. So all the values research, and I can tell you, we've spent $300,000 over 20 years researching Utahns' values, and you came up with essentially exactly the same list with family first, which is at the core of every values ladder that I described about Utahns. So Are you on the right track? Yeah, you're on the right track. Now it gets complicated because family. So there's been a lot of debate in Utah about what kind of housing we have. And I remember the first big fight in Sandy City where I live about an apartment complex coming to Sandy. Any of you know where Quarry Bend is? It's got a bunch of housing of different types near Quarry Bend, sort of moving towards the East Bench. And there was this huge fight, and I got up at a zoning hearing. I said, I'm not here on behalf of anybody other than myself, but we ought to all listen to ourselves. That riffraff you think is going to live in this apartment complex are your own children and grandchildren. And that riffraff may be your own parents. We really need to think twice about our perspective on the way we're creating our place. That all passed, and one of my children actually lived in a townhome in that development later on. And it was great to have him just down the hill. I did not want to drive to Eagle Mountain to see my grandkids. You know how long it takes to get to Eagle Mountain today from where I live? And he was looking at Eagle Mountain. He now lives behind Cabela's, the same son. So how we think about those values, how well we cast our minds forward and can see the changes that are coming. And you're going to have some great speakers today about the changes that are coming. Chris Nelson's going to blow you away with the changes that are going to happen. We have great speakers who are going to talk about how the future will be different than today. And your future is going to be different for two reasons. One, the world's just going to be different. It's just going to be different. What people can afford, how they're going to live, what they want, what is going on outside of Utah and its impacts on us, the national and international economy. Things are going to be different. But the other reason your life is going to be different is because for every one of you, there'll be 1 2/3 of you added on top of that. So that's going to make this area very different. The question is, are you going to be on the cutting edge of that, making it so that families, that attitude about families is pervasive through all that you do. And then I think most of those other things are there to actually serve that perspective. So we've learned some things in this last vision that I want to throw in for you to think about in addition to what's currently in your general plan and your zoning. So we asked people about what we've always known was they want to safe, secure communities. But our research this time also dealt with disaster resilience, agriculture, energy, and we got some new things that got added to what it meant to be safe and secure. One was we needed to be ready for disasters. We're overdue for the big one. The big one will take out the water lines that come down Provo Canyon. You will still have a river. You know, you just start thinking about it. We're not ready. Our current building codes in Utah are designed so your house will not kill you in the big one. They're not designed so your house will be habitable after the big one. I don't know if you knew that, but our current building standards are not designed for your house to be habitable. It just won't kill you and fall down on your head, but it may be off the foundation and so on. So are we ready for disasters? Utahns have a very strong feeling about locally grown food, about being more resilient and self-sufficient in terms of food supply. Utahns came across in these surveys as having a real desire to have more of our energy be local. I don't mean right in our backyards. I'm talking about the basin with vernal and natural gas and renewables and so on, but a very strong push towards energy close by. I don't know if you know that a couple winters ago we were within a very, very, there were 3 days 2 winters ago when the natural gas that we were producing in Utah and Wyoming it was so cold in the east, it was flowing to the east, and there were 3 days where they almost curtailed Utah. And natural gas, like money, you know, water runs downhill and towards money. Well, natural gas also flows towards money, and the great urban centers of the east were cold. They had a big cold snap, and we were that close to having them curtail our natural gas supply. So sometimes we don't think about how fragile the world is. Yes?
Right now, I think there's still 2 million people in Crimea who do not have power because they blew up the power lines that come from Ukraine.
Yeah, yeah. Utahns want to be more independent than we are. Now, we shouldn't take that to extremes, but we do have regional energy supplies we could rely on. We could do a lot better on locally grown food and so on. Utahns want to have an economy that's connected not just to other states, but to the national economy and to the world economy. So that is, different parts of the world economy suffer, and we now see China in the tank, and China caught a cold and everybody's sneezing, particularly if you're in materials supply or meat. Meat prices are coming down because the Chinese aren't buying. And so having a connected economy, and the last thing that makes us resilient that came resoundingly out of this work was a great chance for everybody to get an education so they could get a job. You can't have great communities. And one thing we saw is we did value ladders, for example, in education and economic development. And Utahns care deeply about their own families and their future, but they understand that the communities we live in will only be safe and secure, great places to live if everybody gets an education and everybody can have a place in this economy. It's one thing that is pretty unique about Utahns is that desire to help everyone. Okay, prosperous. What did we learn about might be interesting prosperous? Urban and rural Utah still really do have a connection, and we ought to be thinking about that. It's about the whole state. It's about diversity and connectivity, a diverse economy. Utah's economy is now one of the most diverse in the nation. A lot of that's because of what's going on right in and around Provo, the high-tech businesses. I was on the State Economic Development Board 20 years ago when we studied the industry clusters we wanted in Utah and set out to go after those industries. And it's been amazing what has happened in the state. And it's been spin-offs largely from the universities. You think about the high-tech companies, Novell that was down here, WordPerfect that started here, and now you have the Qualtrics's and the Vivens and I mean, we could just go on and on. Utah's always been a capital poor area. Well, what can you do on the cheap that's creative and at the cutting edge? It's software, right? So we have become a master of the cheap. You know, the nice thing about that is it's also got huge profit margins because it's low capital, right? Just think about, I've got a son-in-law who's formerly with Google, has got 100 software engineers working for him here. And he's raised a little money, but not a lot, and they're making money. And I just watch these, you know, they're not selling their time. They're selling this imaginary, ethereal thing called software and productivity. And anyway, you're right in the middle of this. But we have some older, long-established industries we've been ignoring, like agriculture, mining and minerals, energy, and so on, that we need to go back and make sure we're strong. The military in Utah, Utah still has a very strong military cluster that we're not tending perhaps the way we should. We need to foster the new industries that are coming, and that means we need to create a different kinds of places that those businesses want. Some of them want large campuses where their employees never have to go home. My son-in-law used to go to the Google campus when he was still single, and he could get his hair cut there, he could wash his clothes, want to sleep, he could find a bed. You know, he never had to go home. In fact, he could have lived without an apartment completely. And those kind of, so there are some who want that, others want an urban, walkable, you know, town center feel. We need to create and continue to create those kinds of places as we think about those new industries. And then self-sufficiency and resilience. How fast would our economy recover if we had a major disaster? And I've been to Christchurch, New Zealand, where they had a major earthquake. If you want to meet people from Christchurch, you go all over New Zealand because none of them live in Christchurch anymore. 2/3 of the population moved out, and they're never coming back. Hurricane Sandy, look at Louisiana. It's been 10 years since the big hurricanes in Louisiana. And we talk like it's recovering, but if we had a major earthquake here, we're really ready for our economy to crank back up in it with enough speed that we wouldn't lose. So I'm throwing things in that the city can think about and help with and influence policy on these issues. Educating the workforce for the future. Neighborhood fair and caring, this is that joint double laddered way we think about education and economics. It's not just about me and my kids, it's about everybody and their kids. And this is where you find the heart of Utahns. You know, it's sort of fun because I've seen this kind of work done in other places, and Utahns love the place they live. And because they love the kind of society they want to create, they know everybody's got to be part of that. And so it's part of the natural instinct of people who live here to reach out. And we're going to be need to do that more and more in education and in economics. Healthy, beautiful, and clean. We're all going to have to drive cleaner cars. A third of us by 2050 are going to have to be in non-emitting cars like electrics. We're going to fix our homes and buildings, which are going to become the dominant source of air pollution in the future, PM 2.5. People didn't get that until we did this 2050 analysis and realized that those two fires you tend in your basement, your water heater and your furnace, are very inefficient and produce a lot of nitrogen oxide gases. There is no plan. As this population state doubles, there's no state recreation plan about how to double, to take care of our desires to play in the mountains. And by the way, all those young employees, I mean, Point of the Mountain's a great place for them because they can run a river in a kayak during noon, or they can go fly off a cliff with artificial wings if they really want to do it on their lunch hour. I mean, think about the way Utahns love to play. I got my son-in-law back here who's got these 100 employees because he loves to ski. And when the house came available next to us at the mouth of the Cotton Canyon, I called him in China and said, your ski chalet is available. And unbeknownst to my wife, my son-in-law bought the house next door. So I have 3 grandchildren living next door because it's at the mouth of a canyon. When it snows, he doesn't go to work. He turns around and goes up the canyon. And his Google buddies have all their skis stored in his garage. And that's where the money came from for his and some other ventures in Utah, was those Google friends. So we need a state recreation plan. Do you have one for here? Have you figured out, when you add all these people in Utah Valley, how you're going to continue to play and have great places for your families? And then are we designing our communities so that my children will weigh less than I do when they're my age? And we need to get a lot more blunt about the fact that we're not healthy. And part of that is it's just not easy. Now, we have some famous bike riding mayors in Utah, one of whom is here. Who are your buddies who ride bikes? Well, we just lost one up north. Ralph. Mike Caldwell. How many of you know about Mike Caldwell in Ogden? He rode his bike to work every day last year. Did you know that? Every day, in the snow, in the sleet, it didn't matter, he rode his bike to work. I understand on the 2nd of January of this year, he went there in his big red truck with his heater just blasting out warm air, and swore he'd never make a promise like that again. But he did ride it every day. And because of that, we're seeing this huge boom in active transportation, particularly in Provo. My hat's off to you on what you're doing that. So I want to talk about some of the attributes of safe, secure, prosperous you may not yet have thought about as you've thought about those things you want. Now, I could take you through lots of results from the survey. We have 573 slides of what Utahns said. You're not going to get them. But I just want to say a couple. 82% of Utahns selected a scenario in which communities are designed around walking, transit, short drives, and diverse housing, single-family homes on a variety of lot sizes, townhomes, apartments, condominiums, mother-in-law apartments, etc. That was the scenario that 4 out of 5 Utahns picked for how they want their urban form to be. Now, a lot of you are going to scratch your head and say, really? Is that the way the city council votes and the people who show up at zoning hearings react? Okay, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. But if you show Utahns the benefit in 2050 of that kind of urban fabric, that's what they pick. Now, how different is Utah County? Are you different down here? Different?
Well, there's the number from Utah County. It was a mere 80%, 2% different in Utah County. Now, that's 7,000 Utah County residents plus a statistical survey. So do you think my numbers aren't accurate? That's a lot of you who feel the same way about the future. So I'm going to skip that. So, well, why do you want it? Well, this is why we want it. We want to make life more convenient. And you're going to hear from experts on development today. And they're going to talk about everything from how close together we can put centers and so on, but But a major goal in life is to actually really help us. Is Provo going to be mainly greenfield from here on out, or mainly infill?
Mainly going to be infill. And so how you reestablish that urban fabric, how you strengthen it is going to be the key issue, I think, about the quality of life for the future. I'm going to skip through a bunch of these. How willing are this is Utah County. Utah County residents are willing to build mixed-use centers of jobs, compact housing, shopping, recreation throughout urban areas, even if it means a little inconvenience to the cars. And multi-story buildings are closer to you than they otherwise would have been. And you'll have a little bit greater traffic congestion, but you'll spend less time getting places because destinations are closer to home. Willing, very willing is in black. The mid-gray is willing. Somewhat willing is in light gray, but this is about willingness to tackle that kind of urban form. And that's pretty darn willing. And that's Utah County. And on every one of these willing questions, you're about 2 to 4% different than Salt Lake Valley, which I would have expected. But when you show the benefits of this kind long-term, of this kind of urban form, it really makes a big difference. This is about housing types. You're willing to have a mix of housing types. Look how willing Utah County people are to do that. Now, when you ask them, let's see, I want to tell you one reason. There were 2 things that popped out on urban form and about housing types. One was that they felt like our communities would be safer and better if people of all incomes, ages, backgrounds were distributed, that we didn't grow major pockets of poverty in our valleys. That came out as sort of the top of the list of the why. The next was so that children could live in neighborhoods where they could get a better school and better education. And so there really is sort of this hope of Utahns that we can continue to absorb people from all over the world and make them part of us in a way where their children will be successful. Oh, by the way, this question is all the things that it costs you if we can continue to just build, I'm just saying just build, large lots on large lots, large homes, very much like the suburban fabric of 20 years ago. And you can see all the unwillings on there, and I'll leave this PowerPoint with you. You can study the results. They're all online. Utahns resoundingly said we want cleaner air. Utah County residents said, 75% said we want to get within the standards and at least a margin of safety within those standards. And that's going to take significant work. There's no industry in this valley to point your finger at. People in Salt Lake County can throw rocks at refineries and Kennecott, but you don't have that. And so what is emitted in this valley is your cars and your homes, predominantly. There's a few industries, but they're less than 3%. And so this one is just crying out for continued community involvement. And Provo's working on a plan on how to improve the air quality, how you can all help. Willingness to make trade-offs on air quality. Would you be willing to build more energy-efficient homes with appliances that emit less pollution? Look how willing that one is. Would you be willing to avoid burning wood during winter inversions? It's amazing, given the clamor about that, where Utahns in general are on how willing they are. I'm just going to skip through a couple of these. Would you support even a small tax increase to really create a network of community parks and trails so that you have what planners like to call green infrastructure? You know, so you can walk out the door and everybody's within 5 minutes of someplace they could get in a trail or a park. And Utahns resoundingly said they would like that. I'm going to skip this one. Okay, now, we asked Utahns if they were willing to conserve water, and Utahns said they were willing, on average, to go 23% more than we've already conserved, which is about 17%, which is going to lead to a suggestion we probably up the governor's conservation approach by 2050 to more like 35+% along the way. But why were Utahns want to conserve? I want you to look at the number one reason up there. Ensuring there's plenty of water for farms and food production. Utahns are willing to do a lot to make sure we still produce food in Utah. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I want to skip now to the four major cornerstones that we've identified to help regions grow better. And the first one is about creating a network of quality communities. And I want to skip down. So what does it mean, a network of quality communities? Well, there are different kinds of centers. A center is a place people can go, get things they need, recreate, and so on. We have neighborhood centers that may be anchored by a school or churches. We have town centers that may be anchored by a grocery store, community centers where you have more shopping, and so on. Urban centers. Provo has a couple of sort of urban centers on the way. In fact, all of Provo is becoming a very interesting urban center for this valley. I mean, as you think about yourself, you're a center in a larger pattern, and then you have within the city a pattern that matters. And so these are some examples of centers. The older city centers coming back, new places that you may recognize. 9th and 9th, of course, is an old place. Now, that's a map of Provo. I just had my planners who know very little about Provo just go through and sort of pick out sort of the older pattern that used to be there. Where are your urban centers? Where do you have potential? Now, I'm not going to leave that up very long because you need to do this, not us, okay? But to just say, okay, if we're gonna have the kind of urban fabric that makes life convenient when there's another 800,000 people in this valley, what does that mean in terms of how we organize the city itself? So the goal would be to provide a variety of neighborhoods Utahns can choose from, because the housing market actually wants to function differently and has in the past. I want to talk for a minute about the housing market. How many of you bought something on the internet for Christmas? If you have, raise your hand. Okay. I don't see any age distinction anymore. If I asked that question 4 or 5 years ago, I would have seen the 30s and younger, the digital natives raising their hands. Now I see lots of digital immigrants like myself raising their hands. How many of you went to buy something on the internet and then the next day you didn't buy it, and the next day you're going on the web somewhere and it pops up and says, buy me? How many of you had been retargeted or remarketed? 15% of all retailers' sales these days come from going after you later. They know where you live and they know what you want. Okay, so this Christmas season, it looks like internet sales could be up. For the last 5 years, they've been up about 15% year over year. That's a lot. Okay, this year they could be up 18 to 20% or higher. We don't know yet. But we do know that brick and mortar sales are down by 5 to 10%. So how many of you went out shopping on Black Friday and found you could actually park in the parking lot? When you went in the store, it wasn't crowded? Anybody do that besides me? I did it as an experiment. I didn't buy anything on Black Friday. Yeah, my wife and I refused to shop on Black Friday. It's a matter of principle. I did buy something online on Black Friday. But the fact is, we have a trend, and markets put wind at your back to do some of the right things. And one of the right things that's going to happen is a lot of the areas that are brick and mortar are going to change. Now, take a look at the University of Mall. What is going in the University Mall? They lost a couple of their traditional large anchor tenants. What moved into the mall? Apartments, office buildings, a furniture store. I mean, do you see the evolution that's going on as less brick and mortar is going to be necessary? Dillard's just in Salt Lake just consolidated a major, massive new Dillard's at Fashion Place, but the one at 106 South just turned into a discount store. Okay, so we can see this trend, and what that's going to do is that you're going to see a slide from our professor here, who's the world's expert on this, but it's going to show you that there's how long things last that are commercial or retail. They don't last very long. Your houses, once you put a neighborhood of houses together, they last a long time. So my point is that the market is going to turn over for you a lot of the older places that you didn't think would turn over. Think of the Covey's store. How many of you ever bought anything at the Covey's store on Center Street? What did they used to sell? Wasn't it suits? Okay, I think I went there during law school to buy a suit. And a tailor's. Now it's what? Okay. Now it's a major, it's a wonderful venue. I went there for one of my granddaughters who was in a nutcracker. So that's one market trend, is that there's going to be a lot of turnover of these older places. The other market trend is people are going to be able to afford less for housing, and we're going to need to provide a mix of housing for our own children and grandchildren, for our parents, that's different than in the past. And that's really an invitation to rethink both your general plan and your zoning. Whether or not you're going to accommodate that, whether or not the structure of families and what they need is changing. Now, this shows you just a projection of how much of Utah County will cover by 2050 if we keep building at the density we're building over the last 10 years. That's what, by 2050, we'll have covered all that. I want you to notice that the farmland in the valley is essentially gone, okay? Now, if we accommodate the housing mix that at least some experts would project, with a provision of infill centers in yellow, that's about how much we might chew up. Now, it could be less than that if the cities actually take full advantage of the infill opportunities that happen. Now, I just want to give you a sense of that. By the way, the lot size in Utah County is already coming down. It's already a third smaller than it was 15, 20 years ago. You also have another phenomena, which is not so much a city phenomena as a county phenomena, where you have this minimum lot size of 5 acres, where people plop down a house and they actually use about 1 to 2 acres of that, and the other sort of goes to waste. Nothing chews up farmland faster than 5-acre zoning. And I just throw it out for you to think about, even though you're not the county leaders, you have an influence on that. You're still the largest agricultural producer in Utah County. You're still by far the lead. That's your farmland is in green, the irrigated farmland. That's the decline in fruit production from 87 to 2006. Is that a trend we're happy with? What are we going to do about it? I just look at your general plan, and I was hunting around for agriculture, and it's been relegated to sensitive areas. Okay, but you ought to think about whether or not there'll be any orchards, any vegetable farms left in Provo in a few years. Now, this is my opportunity and asset list for you. Now, as an outsider, I look at you and say, okay, I know that Wasatch County is going to quadruple in size by 2060. Okay, Wasatch back's just going to boom. Would you rather live in Cedar Valley, or would you rather live in Wasatch County? A lot of people are going to opt for Wasatch County, but I just want you to think about, you're a center in the middle of a booming valley. How do you create the kind of central place which powerfully leads this valley to be what it can be for the long term? But look at all of the things you've got. That I was thinking about the Riverwoods. That's a fabulous mixed-use center. And I remember when there was nothing there, as do many of you. You're redesigning the Bulldog Boulevard. The Front Runner Station, I just drove by it again to take another look this morning. That's starting to take off. You've had a lot of great faithful anchor tenants on Center Street, right? Bless New Skin's heart, bless the Roney brothers for having stuck out and done that over the years. But Zion's and Wells Fargo, county offices, the Marriott, and now you've got an LDS Temple. You've redefined this central place. You've got a tremendous opportunity to make the center of Provo take off, as well as these other subsidiary centers for it. You've got some wonderful new things like the Covey Center, the Convention Center, so on, new restaurants. You've got bike lanes coming, Google Fiber. I'm jealous. I'm so jealous. Canyons, the lake and the river. You sit in the middle of this spectacular region full of recreational opportunities. You've got a wonderful reputation. I mean, look at all the national things that it gets said about Provo and Orem. And one thing, we just finished helping Rexburg do a vision about their town-gown relationship, as they call it, the university-city relationship. Now, you're different than Rexburg. If you pulled BYU Idaho out of Rexburg with its 16,000 students, there'd be hardly anything left in 5 years of Rexburg. They know that. But that town-gown relationship has a lot to do with the future of this place. It makes Provo special. universities change the way places really are, cities and towns are, and there's a richness to places with a university. One of our friends here just went to Tucson, is living in a town that's not really very big in Tucson, and it just makes things different, and I think there's a lot you could do with that over the long term. The BYU Provo relationship, bus rapid transit system, how to use that to create new places. You've got the Provo Springville Industrial Corridor, and as somebody who knew the steel industry, that's the old Ironton plant, a lot of it down in there, but that's a real opportunity to think about what's going to go there. Better freeway access, which you've been struggling with for a quarter of a century, should you or shouldn't you? How are you going to get people? By the way, sales tax is going to get redistributed. So start taxing internet sales. That formula is going to go from half point of sale. It's going to automatically shift to population over time, which is going to be a very interesting trend in Utah. More bike lanes and trails, hospital development, redevelopment. They're going to rebuild all of the hospital, right? And that's going to be a huge anchor tenant. What should be there in that area, and how do you do it? An airport, a subsidiary airport, where you can go into the other hubs from here. There's a huge opportunity to make that work, I think. And then Provo is the center for Utah Valley's growth. I think those are all things, as you think about, I thought I had there your values. If you think about your values, every time you look at something, whether it's your general plan or your zoning ordinance, you ought to start with those values. Does this provision, does this idea promote what I think we need for families and safe city and community, looking out, to 2030, but also looking out beyond? And if it does, you'll continue to create a great place. I think the future of the city is bright. You're going to be one of the shining stars of Utah. Utah Valley really needs leadership. And you're already very much the mixed-use sort of kind of place that we need other places in Utah to grow to be like. So I've got like 1 minute left. Does anybody have a question they want to ask? Yes. Yeah.
Because you're describing people that I don't know, like they're aligned with how I feel.
Right.
So I'm just wondering what that survey was.
Okay, the survey was 53,000 Utahns. It was done by Dan Jones. And they answered. What they did was they picked scenarios on different topics of what they'd like Utah to be like that were developed by the task forces.
And then how they found it was just completely randomly.
Well, the 53,000. Okay, good point. The 53,000, we wanted to make sure we got as far out into Utah as we could. So about 20,000 of the answers came through an effort to get the schools and the parents and grandparents, but people who took the survey in the name of a school, we had a donor who gave the schools $1 for their activity funds. Okay, so about 20,000 of the 53,000 came that way. About 15,000 of them came from just 100 organizations, including cities and others, who sent the survey out to whatever mailing lists they had. So, for example, IHC, the state of Utah, sent it to all their employees. And then we had a third effort, which was a digital online invitation where the governor or Mark Eaton or Studio C or Noel Picus Pace, there was a little banner ad that said, "Come answer and tell us about Utah's future." But to make certain that was representative of Utah, we had Dan Jones do a random sample survey of exactly the same questions of 1,200 Utahns. So they did a statistical survey which said that the overall results were reflective of the hopes and dreams of Utahns. It was accurate. So now you're saying, who are these people? Well, they're actually your neighbors when they think about the future. If you ask them what's going on tomorrow on this piece of ground, and it threatens what they think is their investment in their home or things like that, reaction's one way. And so changing urban spaces, particularly infill, is probably the most complicated thing that cities do. It's the most challenging, but it may be the most rewarding in the long term. Okay, I need to, okay, I think that was a thank you. I'll be around for a little while if people want to chat and ask other questions. Thank you very much.